Number 8, this is a public hearing, code amendments to Title 19. It's city initiated. And since David Stroud is not here for the presentation, Sarah Carroll, are you taking it, or Nora?
No, me.
Nora Shepherd,
Me.
time is yours.
Okay. So, these are code amendments that are being proposed. We've been working on these for a while. We're always looking for ways to streamline our processes. But at the same time, making sure that we have enough opportunity to make good decisions and involve the public in that decision making. We, you know, the development community and applicants have indicated that sometimes they think maybe we do too many steps, too many public hearings and all those kinds of things. And the way the code it currently reads, we have some redundant meetings and hearings that aren't required by state code. And the city council has directed staff to take a look at that and to try to streamline our processes some. So that's the background where this comes from. So the purpose of the amendments, among other things, provides a development process that's streamlined while still providing oversight and review by the city to allow orderly growth. So the proposed changes are all to the use table, which is in it's a process table in 19.13.04. And Sarah, it's actually in the, oh, it's down here. It's down here. I put it down at the bottom. So this is the table itself, and this is the, you know, it has the things that are being changed. And it looks like this, except I can't get it to move, but anyway. I know, it's strange. There we go. And it goes through, and all of the various processes indicate who gets to review what and who the final deciding authority is. So in summary, we'll go back to the PowerPoint. What it does is it allows for a concept plan to be submitted, which is a non-binding review by the planning director. So it's just sort of a once-over. We think this is a good idea. We think these are some issues. And my presumption is there would be a small fee for that, but not the same kind of fee that we would require for other kinds of preliminary reviews. And then a concept plan with a rezone. Right now, this is required. With a rezone, a concept plan is required. But a developer, what this says is a developer could come in before they actually make an application for a rezone and ask the council and the planning commission to review it to see if it's even worth moving forward to apply for a rezone. So again, it's a concept plan. There would be a fee, but it wouldn't be that big. Conditional use, right now, state code does not require a public hearing as a part of the conditional use process. We do have a public hearing currently in our code, and we are proposing to eliminate that public hearing, so to be consistent with state code. A lot of other communities have done this. It was a change not too long ago. Planned unit development concept plans. Again, a non-binding review by the planning director. And if variations are requested, the Planning Commission and City Council would review the proposal. So he'd take a look at it and decide if things are should be reviewed by the Planning Commission because they're significant enough. We don't approve new planned unit developments, so this really applies to those things that are existing planned unit developments. Planned unit development preliminary plat. Again, we would remove the public hearing requirement at the Planning Commission level. Planned unit development, final plat, planning director approval unless it's inconsistent with the preliminary plat. For most of our other processes, we already do this. The final plat's at the planning director level unless it's inconsistent with the preliminary plat, and then we bring it back to you. preliminary plats in a community plan or a village plan. Often the community plans, and especially the village plans, are specific enough that they actually show a lotting plan. Legacy Farms does. Wildflower does. So the village plan shows a really specific lotting plan. And the thought here is that if a preliminary plat comes in and it's consistent with that lotting plan, including open spaces and road standards and widths and all those kinds of things, it's totally consistent with those things, then the planning director could approve it. And if the community and village plan are broad enough and general enough that they don't include that lotting plan, then it would go to the planning commission review and city council approval. Preliminary plat, removing public hearing requirement as it's not required by state code. Again, a lot of communities are doing this. Site plan, removing the public hearing requirement as it's not required by state code. Delegating the planning commission as the land use authority, so it would not go to the city council. You would get to make the final decision. So those are the changes that are proposed. I'd be happy to answer any questions, and I've given you in your staff report and here options for taking action on it.
So, if not to take anything away, but to add to what Nora said, the problem when you're making an administrative decision, you have a public hearing, is the fact that that opens the door for potential public clamor. Most of the time people aren't in here saying, hey, it doesn't meet code, it doesn't meet the required setbacks. People aren't in here for that. They're saying, we don't like that this is going to be multifamily, it's going to reduce the value of my property, and it's going to create, they raise all this public clamor that's not code based. And so that's really tough when you're making an administrative decision to accept public comment. The recommendation that that I've been making ever since I've been here is to make that simply just a public meeting, not a public hearing. We made progress through the years, and we think that at this point we just need to make that switch. It's recommended by the property rights ombudsman. Makes a lot of sense. Why have a public hearing when you have to base your decision strictly on what the code says, not what residents say. Residents, when they give their comments, it's on policy and legislative decisions, and their comments are valuable in making those policy and legislative decisions. But once the policy has been made and the code has been set, then it's just the application of that by entities that are responsible for making those decisions.
Kevin, about your comment, we have had public come in and they have quoted the code. They have quoted the state laws. They have brought those up. Would this preclude them from being able to do that? Because those things are what we make our decision upon with an administrative decision.
So on two of the applications, the only areas where that's proposed to change is the preliminary plat and the site plan. So like the Times Square that you saw tonight, or if you're seeing a subdivision, a preliminary plat for a subdivision. So those two processes are where state code no longer requires a public hearing.
Yeah, they can always submit comments in writing. The applicant would have a chance to review those. We don't recommend them bringing up their comments during the public comment portion. I don't recommend that, because then they're turning that into basically a quasi-public hearing. But yeah, that's the balance that you have to strike. But it's very tough when you are faced with that decision, that difficult decision, and you have a room full of people, and maybe one or two are mentioning the code, but the rest of them just say we don't like it. How do you make a decision when you're faced with all that opposition? We have filters. What's that?
We have filters on our ears. We know that an administrative decision is based solely on code and on state law, and that we are not to make a decision based upon clamor or opinion or...
Kevin, you're saying remove the emotion? It removes the emotion from the room?
Yeah. Removes the emotion from the room. it makes it so you can stick to your decision at hand, which is applying the code.
So
It's the vast majority of the time it's public clamor. It's not code-based.
that has largely been my experience. However, in this proposal, there's the reduction of 7 opportunities for public hearings with the addition of 0 at the city council level. And so at city council meetings, they don't even have, I mean, they have the public comments, but they don't really even do public hearings. So where does the public get to voice their policy and opposition type things, where in the past they've been doing it here because we're the only ones who have public hearings, it appears, for the most part. And then they go on and on about their legislative or how they're disgruntled about this and that. And we're always reminding them that this is an administrative body. It seems like there's no place for concerned citizens to raise those types of things in a public meeting.
There are really two kinds of decisions, and you guys all know this, that you have administrative decisions and policy decisions. So we more than welcome public input, especially when we're making policy decisions, we're changing code, we're making law. Then it's really, really important to have that public input. But once the law is set, it's really just a matter of applying the law, so it's an administrative decision. So the public input that we receive is usually not, it's usually more about policy. And that, unfortunately or fortunately, that's the system works so that we're applying the policy that has already been adopted. So the public input is really most important when you're setting that policy. And that can happen both at the, planning commission level and then under public input at the city council level.
Well, Meg Ryan, when it comes to train us all, I mean, she's mentioned that several times about the administrative, why subject ourselves to that for administrative, because we have to ignore them if the applicant meets code. I was just wondering how, and I think that's what Kevin was saying. And so I just wonder then, you mentioned a couple times where the state no longer requires it, it's no longer part of state law.
Right.
So how connected is that, where the areas where we are removing public hearings are the same places where it's actually administrative, as to where the state law no longer requires it, and that's administrative.
Yes.
You know what I'm saying? Because if the state law no longer requires it, but there happens to be a legislative place, and we are, or a legislative action, and we are removing public hearing, then that doesn't serve the purpose of hearing public comment in the legislative.
Right.
So is it pretty much in line? Is it pretty much aligned?
Yeah, we've made it completely consistent with state code.
Okay, then
And
I
state
have no
code,
issues.
just so you're aware, never required a public hearing in those instances.
So we're just opening ourselves up to stress.
Really are, and if you remember, like 7 years ago, I think, well, Commissioner Still was here, but we actually required in many cases public hearings with the council. We removed that, and it seems like it's very streamlined now. It's an easier decision for them to make. Really are, that's a difficult position to be put in, where you have many people here, and you can't make a decision other than what the code says. They do occasionally bring up valid points about meeting the code, but that's something that they can submit in writing anyway. But yeah, Nora is absolutely right. When it's a policy legislative decision, that's when public comment is relevant. You can even consider public clamor in those cases.
Right.
But the one thing I worry about, I agree with this, and I don't have a problem with it. But there'll be cases where we will have a packed room, and they will think that they are going to be able to speak, and the perception is not going to be the best.
But we're not precluded from opening it, are we? Or are we precluded from opening it in those cases? We just don't have to notify anybody.
It's not recommended. The Open and Public Meetings Act doesn't prohibit it. I don't recommend that for the reasons we just talked about. But then also the public comment portion oftentimes turns into that, where they can get up and make comment on the items on the agenda. I don't like to encourage people to do that.
In the past, we've always directed, if they have something that's related to an item on the agenda, reserve their comments for then. This is going to eliminate a lot of those, so aren't we just pushing those to the beginning of the meeting for public input? Because somebody has something to say, they're going to say it, whether it's, public hearing or public input.
I'd rather hear it during the item.
It will cut down on the public comments, as we've seen with the city council.
So maybe
Yeah, that's also a very unpopular decision to make from a political standpoint. Say, no, you can't, if it's not a public hearing, you can't comment during the public comment portion. I would say just allow it, but don't encourage it. The problem is when you encourage it, you're potentially violating the due process rights of the applicant. The applicant isn't going to have a chance to respond. There's no public hearing that's part of the city code that allows that. So you have to be really careful there.
So,
Like I said, don't prohibit it, but don't encourage it.
Just a minute, Commissioner Steele. Ironically, this is a public hearing, so we need to open public comment even though. So,
Yeah.
we'll open public comment for item number 8, code amendments to Title 19, city initiated at this time.
And because this is a legislative item, it's really important to hear from the public.
Okay, we're closing public comment, and I would like to, sorry I interrupted, but I've been wanting to say this. You talked about how once we set the policy for many of these decisions, I mean, we've already done the zone changes, maybe there's a master development agreement in place, and we don't really have the ability to make those changes. Now, on this proposed change, it shows that the master development agreement no longer has a public hearing. And it also doesn't have a public hearing in the city council level. So when does the public get to actually make a comment about a master development agreement, which grants rights to an applicant?
They're actually, so right now, it's, the city council does not hold a public hearing. They're the ones, and the master development agreements basically put down in legal terms what's already agreed to in like a community plan or a village plan or a site plan or an annexation or a subdivision. So it's already gone through other process. And the MDA is a contract basically between the city council and the applicant that puts it all in writing.
When exactly is the point for the public, so they know, when is the point that a master development or a large development gets rights to density and whatever else? When is that, Nora?
That's during the bigger, the community plan or the village plan. If we have a mixed residential zone, it will be at the neighborhood plan level. There's always a process that establishes the parameters for development, and then it's reflected in the master development agreement.
So for example, Wildflower, if people don't like what's going to happen in Wildflower, those rights have already been granted.
They have.
When did they get granted?
As a part of the community plan and the
yes.
village plans.
So that, just so the public knows, that's when you come.
Yes, that's when you come.
Okay, so here's the thing with any development agreement, including a master development agreement. We don't enter into those when they're already entitled to something. The reason why is because when you sign a contract, there has to be consideration on both sides. It doesn't matter how much. You could get $5 for your $20,000 car, but it's still a binding contract because you receive some value in return for that car you sold. In this case, if we're not giving anything up, and if they already have the zoning and entitlements that they need, we don't do any agreements. So master development agreements and development agreements are already going to be tied to a legislative decision. The council is going to say, and the planning commission would make a recommendation on it, developer gets this zone and these entitlements if they do this for the city. And so we're giving up something and they're giving up something. There's consideration on both ends. The reason why we don't want to have the development agreement be part of a public hearing is because then we're dealing with just the legal boilerplate language in the agreement that incorporates the legislative decision that's already been made. So if we need to have something in there that says with the rezone, it's not subject, the development agreement isn't subject to a public hearing in and of itself, but it's but it has, has to be in the packet at the same time or something like that, we're welcome to do that, but we're happy to do that, but there really doesn't need to be a public hearing on a development agreement.
Thank you for explaining that. The only concern I had is that when we're granting rights to a developer, that the public has their chance to weigh in. So if those have already been done before the MDA, then I'm not so concerned.
That's just really the legal way of accomplishing the legislative decision that you're already going to be considering to make a recommendation on it.
You're just reducing it to writing.
Right.
Okay.
Putting it into the contract.
Okay.
You mentioned that if we allow for public comment at the first of the meeting, that is not fair to the applicant because they don't get a chance to respond. So if it's not a public hearing and it's only a public meeting, would he be able then to rebut at that time what was said earlier if he was in attendance, and if he's not, then that's another issue?
Yeah. Well, and in fact, in many cases when we receive written, and hopefully we're still doing this, there's been some changes in the planning department, but in all cases, if there's comments submitted by email or in writing, the applicant should always be given those comments so they can have a chance to rebut that. It's part of their due process rights. So yes, if there's comments made during the public comment portion, the applicant, if they're here in the room, they need to be given a chance to respond to that. If they're not in the room, then we need to notify them of those comments that were made.
Would they be allowed to rebut immediately, or would you wait till their item comes up?
Just at some point. The council's they have a procedure that says after staff is presented, the applicant's given an opportunity to respond, then you hold the public hearing, then the applicant's given another chance to respond, and so there's 2 opportunities to respond. It's whatever you consider to be fair for the applicant, so they have a full opportunity to respond. I do see sometimes, and I don't know that anyone's realizing what they're doing, but they basically have already made up their minds before the applicant even has a chance to respond. You want to be careful about that too. You don't want to you want to make sure you're giving the impression that you're looking at this, you're still considering it, you're going to consider all the input that's been given, you haven't made up your mind. And then as you deliberate, after you've taken all the evidence and heard from everyone, that's when you debate it and deliberate and make a decision based off of that.
I've been on the other end where I was denied due process in presenting one, so it's something that I think is very important.
We do a great job here of hearing from the applicant. So I haven't had any concerns with how the Planning Commission handles it.
Just for discussion purposes, I do want to point out that if a public hearing isn't required, then noticing wouldn't be required either. So a lot of times that's how the public, and I'm bringing that up for discussion. I don't want you to miss that little piece of the discussion if you're, having concerns about how the public gets informed or things like that. So anyhow.
I think that's actually fine because when we were bringing up the beginning of the meeting has a public, a chance for the public to comment.
Input.
Yeah, public input. That public is going to be here even though we didn't by notice. So I think that's why it's a good idea to allow them to speak at that time.
Right, so the agendas are still published on the website. There's still the public notice on the state site on the public notice state site that's required.
Right.
We wouldn't do the mailed notice. So if you're living next to vacant land and a preliminary plat and a preliminary plat is coming that meets code, you wouldn't get a notice. And so that's just something for you to think about, but it has its pros and cons, obviously.
Any other comments on the proposed code changes?
Oh, actually, yeah, sorry, I thought we're still in your, that you're still going through the thing, and I didn't realize it was over.
I think that was it.
So in this chart, you know where it says optional or non-binding? I was wondering, so how is the option enacted? I mean, when it says it's an optional thing to do, when do we decide that it's something that we do?
That would be
or the
decided,
director does, or-
that would be decided by the applicant, really.
Oh, so the applicant could request.
So a concept plan with a rezone, with or without a rezone. So if they want to go and take a, go and have a concept plan reviewed by the Planning Commission and City Council before they actually file an application, then the applicant can choose to do that.
Okay.
And they're non-binding because it's just preliminary feedback. You're not actually making a decision, it's just some preliminary feedback.
Yeah, because I did have a question about that, where in a couple places, the director makes non-binding recommendations, and I was wondering, what's the point of that if it...
It's non-binding,
just-
it's a concept plan level.
So just providing advice and...
Yeah, just
suggestions.
input, right. And then
That
there,
language is already basically in the code, that it's non-binding.
yeah.
So, but for the that is, I think, a valid point. The optional, we need to specify who has the option.
Who has the option, yeah.
So we can add that.
That's a good,
on
yeah,
your
because I didn't even
recommendation.
think about it was the applicant's option. I thought it was our option, and how do we decide whether we do it or not?
Good point. I hadn't looked at it that way.
Well, we've always required that there be a concept plan with the application of a rezone.
And we still will. This is if somebody wants to come before they file a rezone application.
Got it. Okay.
My only question.
So we've been doing them as work sessions so far, so you might see a work session before a rezone so they can get the feedback. It gives them the opportunity to get the temperature of the city and to determine if they want to continue to spend funds on that proposal.
I like that.
All right?
I just have a comment.
Sure.
Since the council is giving us, or since we will be the final say on the site plans, we need to have some method that the council will know what we decided. And because, and then I'm going to say on things that are decided by staff, both Planning Commission and council need to be made aware. There's times when you get caught in the grocery store by somebody saying, what's this? I heard this, and you're standing there going, well, I don't know. And so I know Kimber used to put a sheet in our packet each time and say what has been applied for, and then what has been approved by staff. And I'd like to see us go back to that. Then everybody knows what's going on.
Yeah, we talked about that. Mark is going to have David do that.
Thank you.
Yeah, I mean, for any of these things that you're not going to see immediately. Well, there's some things being delegated to the planning director, some things being delegated to the planning commission, and have a method to basically keep everyone up.
Okay. Is that the same information available on the city site, though, you're asking for?
Not always.
Okay.
And sometimes it comes in too late to ward off the...
Yeah, we're going to work on something where it's going to be more real-time data given to council, planning commission, council and planning commission.
I just wanted to ask this question. What's driving all the changes in public hearings? What, are we worried that we're using too much time as a city, or what, why are we trying to eliminate so much public interaction? Is it because we're not required to by law? I mean, it doesn't seem very customer friendly to our citizens.
Well, and I don't fully know what the answer to that is. I know the council has talked about it, and so we're moving forward with these amendments. But I know last year, the mayor and Mark Christensen and Owen Jackson, the assistant city manager, met with a number of developers and people in the development community who expressed that there was an awful lot of process and that it took a long time to get through the process. And so I think that's partially where some of this started. And then, you know, there have been changes in state law over the years to kind of decrease the amount of process that is needed. And so I think we wanted to bring ourselves into consistency with state law.
Well, I think also Meg Ryan, again, I'll bring her up. I've been through two of her trainings, and each time she stressed very strongly that we eliminate public hearings for administrative actions because there's nothing we can really do. And in fact, it helps the city not only streamline, but I think it does help be fair, not just on the part of the on the developers, the applicants, but also the city citizens, whether they realize it or not, because we are providing a decision process that's based purely on code and it's fair.
Right. And I think in part it creates an unrealistic expectation when we have a public hearing and then they don't realize that they're really constrained about the decision. They don't know the difference between an administrative decision and a legislative decision.
State law specifically says ignore them if the applicant meets code. So that's even more difficult for us to do than it would be if we just simply followed the code.
And I can tell you with the council that we've had positive results with that. And there was a lot of hesitation in the beginning, but it's worked out where it's much more of just strictly an analysis of the code and whether or not the application meets code. The stuff that's extraneous doesn't come in as much. Like I said, there are rare occasions where they bring up code-specific comments, but that's pretty rare. And oftentimes that code's already been analyzed, or in almost all cases, it's already been analyzed by staff and by the decision maker authority.
Well, I did say it before, and I'll say it one more time. I heard the quote, "There's nothing that we can do that is based upon the code and that it's rare." Those three arguments, for me, don't hold enough. This is assuming that the public is uneducated, do not know the code, and cannot bring that forward to our body. And I disagree with that. So I just wanted to let that be put on the record.
Another quote we've all heard is perception is reality. And one of my larger concerns is that the public is, they may not know the difference between administrative and legislative, and they may come as active citizens to come and voice their opinion.
We can educate them.
And they may not like what they hear, but the perception, if we're trying to be a city that has transparency and visibility, and then the public sees that we're reducing the opportunities for them to talk, however, in accordance with state law or efficient we're trying to make those, I think there's going to have to be some information available, or a lot of education, although I guess now that Chris is a member, nobody's watching the YouTube channel.
My wife is.
Okay,
she sent me a message. She says she's our #1 fan.
She's saying you're looking good. Yeah. So it is a big concern. I don't know that I disagree with the efficiency standpoint, and we've all been up here with a lot of people at the podium, and at the end of the day, we have to say what you're saying is important, but we don't really care what we do.
No, that's not what
because it's code. It's code.
It says. The law says ignore them if it's code. I mean, I'm not trying to. I think that we actually have many more ways for the public to provide input than historically most cities have provided. I mean, I remember when I was in San Diego, I was very active as a student. There were very few ways where we could provide input. Because there was no internet, for example. There was no website. There was no email. There was no, we have so many more ways of access for the public to access and to provide input than we've ever had historically. And yeah, it's great. I actually appreciate very much when the public comes and they comment. However, legally, none of that really matters.
But
Unless they have, unless they have a code, unless they have something to bring forward,
They don't have.
but they can.
But they can.
Yeah, so they have avenues where they can provide that.
So we're just gonna say, okay, if you have a code, argument to present, you have to do it through email or text us or
No, they could
whatever,
go to the
but you
city.
can't come to us publicly.
They can. They could go to the city offices. People do that all the
But
time.
that's not public, that's not public record. Am I wrong?
Can't that happen at the public comment portion of the meeting, if they want to?
Like I said, I don't know that you want to encourage that, just because then you're turning it into a de facto public hearing.
It's not that we're encouraging it, we're just not eliminating it.
We're not. We're not.
We're making recommendations as far as what's the best practice. Because it's tough. Some of our ugliest cases, and it's been a few years since we've had some ugly ones, but it's been where the room is packed, and I mean, going out the hallways and down, sometimes even down into the stairs, and
I'm not afraid of that. Are you afraid of that?
and I'll tell you,
Attendance of those.
mostly even if you give them a heads
Even
up,
personal.
it's got to be, you got to focus on the code only. There's always other comments that come up, and you know when people people can get together and consolidate, and it's really tough as a decision maker to be faced with, do you either side with the developer or do you side with these 100 people that are all opposed to it?
I believe in the 110
That's where it
rule,
can
though.
negatively impact your
If there's
decision.
if there's 100 people that have an opinion about it and they're coming forward to voice it, there's 10
There's
times
1,000
times
people
10,
behind them.
There's 1,000 people who have the same opinion, so.
Well, and
Yeah, and you can definitely try to cut it off and say, focus on the code, but invariably there's going to be stuff that comes out that's not it.
I guess what I'm saying is, we know that it's an administrative action, so we'll focus on administrative action, but instead of reducing the public's chance to come and talk, even if they're focusing on legislative or policy, I almost think that should be applauded. That even though they're misguided on what their approach is, they're at least coming to the city and voicing their opinion and trying to be an active citizen, and I'm worried that reducing that by 7 and adding 0 is even though there's other means, and even though it's sometimes really hard to sit through, I think about the annexation, I guess that was a little bit different because it was quasi-legislative. It was a recommendation, I guess. And a lot of it was just, regurgitating the same thing, but at least they're here and at least they're talking, voicing their opinions.
So in my 2.5 hours experience as a planning commissioner, I've had several small business owners approach me in the last few weeks, speaking about some of these exact things, about how hard it is to get an application through to the city. And while I 100% agree with public having comment, if public can comment during the public comment section of a meeting, and it can be addressed during that item, I don't see how we're necessarily taking away the public's ability to make a comment on an action.
I'll see it.
Kevin, you keep mentioning a concern that it becomes a public hearing when it's supposed to be a public meeting. Could you is there a dividing line? Or are we just all going to be looking at you saying, what do we do now?
Yeah, so you're making a recommendation on the policy decision now. If you want to leave the public hearings in there, fine, that's totally fine. There's ways of handling that. You have a lot less pressure as a planning commission because you don't face the political heat that the council does. Although they could say, well, you appointed Commissioner so-and-so and he didn't listen to our comments, and so I'm not going to vote for you now. But you're appointed at the will of the city council, so you have a lot less heat from the residents. And if you make a decision that goes against what the majority of the people here, or vast majority of the people here for the public hearing want you to make, there's not the political pressure that the council has. So if you want to leave that in, that's totally fine. We've streamlined this enough, so some of the council decisions are now planning commission decisions, so that doesn't have to go to the council in addition, or the planning director makes decisions. that'll help tremendously. If you're uncomfortable with removing public hearings, that's totally fine.
Here's the thing for me.
State
Data is very powerful. And if you look back at all of our public hearings, really most of them, people aren't even here. And they open and they close and we're happy with that. But when people want to be heard, I want to be able to hear them. And if it takes a little bit longer, I have to stay up late at night to listen to them and address their concerns. Yeah, I can parse through what's an administrative decision, what's code, what's not. I think I can handle that. I don't know about the rest of you, but I don't want to cut off the public. I mean, and I do, at the same time, I want to be business friendly. But our citizens, you know, they already have, you have to balance between the vested rights of the people who are here and the people who are applying, so.
Well, number one, I think that the council has requested these streamlining efforts. Number one. Number two, if we keep requiring public hearings on things that don't need it, then that increases the timeline that they're in queue to see us. And what would be a public hearing, public note or a notice? It can be as, what, a week, 7 days?
24 hours notice.
Okay.
A public meeting.
And now they have to get it in, and it has to have 2 weeks' notice. And that, I've been on the other side where 2 weeks meant that it didn't go.
Kills the project, costs more money. Mm-hmm. Everything back. So should we go through the things you said? Whatever doesn't need a public hearing. What are the things that do, and what are the things that don't need a public?
Mark can speak to it, but I think what I'm gathering is that administrative actions, all the public hearings have been eliminated. Correct?
Not all.
I mean, you have the annexation stuff and rezones, which have public hearings.
Any administrative decision no longer has a public hearing. You're correct on that.
So we're assuming the public doesn't have any administrative knowledge.
No, I don't think that assumes anything about the public. It has nothing to do with what we assume about the public. It has to do with what we can't do, which is if 100 people, like Kevin said, comes here and said that we don't like this multi-density or this multi-family density, and we say, okay, great, we heard your comments, but we're going to do it anyway. I mean, how
that's
do you?
Public clamor.
Yeah, so I think that's
But
what we're eliminating.
We're also limiting their ability to
No, we're not
present
eliminating
an argument towards code or
only
something.
at this meeting, but it's a meeting that wouldn't have listened to them anyway.
We wouldn't have listened to public clamor on an administrative decision, but we may listen to code on an administrative decision.
No,
On
we
those
listen to
very
staff.
few times, then they can come in at public comment and make those same comments on code.
So the question is whether you do it at the beginning of the meeting or during the item, and I say, why not do it during the item?
Well, but it's the timing, and
No, I don't think we should lengthen the process for the developers and for ourselves just for the 1 in 10 chances that a resident has better insight into the code than we do. I mean, I think if that one person has better insight into the code than we do, then they could bring it up at the beginning of the session of our meeting, as opposed to having to notify all the people, send all the notices out, make it into a public hearing where everybody has to know about it. I mean, that's a whole process that the developer has to go through and the staff has to go through just for that 1 in 10 that could be taken care of at the beginning of the
So are we then saying that, if they, speak in public comment and they address an item on the agenda, then we're saying the due process has to happen where the applicant has to be able to respond to that. But do they have to respond if it's anything except for administrative?
No. I mean, Kevin said that we have.
Yeah.
Our decision's administrative, but the applicant, if they're talking about they don't like this or that or traffic, and does the applicant even have to respond to that because it's not administrative
Yeah, I mean, you want to give the applicant as much opportunity to respond. If it was, just think if it was your property being rezoned or a
Good luck,
decision
Mr.
on
Chair.
a plat was being made, you'd want every opportunity to voice your concerns. So I would say legislative or administrative, you want to give the applicant the full opportunity to respond.
So is there a difference between having public input at the beginning and not, so let's take item 6, which was item 7, the site plan for the point. It's listed as a public hearing. Can we still have public input for that item, or does public input have to happen at the beginning? Because part of the challenge that we're going to face is if you have 6 people talking about 6 different items, and they get up, then we have to have the applicant be able to defend himself, and then Kirk is going crazy because he's trying to balance the rights of the applicant versus, and giving the chance to respond, and it just goes nuts.
The way you're handling it, you do it really well. You say if it's a public hearing, save your comment for the public hearing.
Ask.
Anything else, feel free to.
We're doing it every single time.
The other thing I see, the other difference I see is the amount of time between the notice or whether we notice at all. Am I wrong? So what is, if we don't have a public hearing, the notice requirements are different, right? What's the difference? 24 hours versus a week?
2 weeks.
Versus 2 weeks?
Well,
So our
functionally,
lawyer just
it's
told
2
us,
weeks, yeah.
our lawyer just told us that we want to provide every opportunity for the public to be able to provide a response. And so
Here's a
2
great
weeks sounds
example.
better than 24 hours.
The applicant.
Sorry,
Right.
you're saying the applicant.
You're saying, the planning commission, you're acting in your role saying what do you, I mean, you're representing not just
I'm balancing the both.
So here's a,
representing the city, and you're also representing the residents of the city, and so your
right.
concerns about removing the public hearing are justified, and it's a great debate that we're having.
here's a great example. Lexington Green, we had a public hearing, opened it, closed it. I think we opened it again and closed it. This was a continued item, and it's an administrative item. And from that came a suggestion from residents who are concerned about farming equipment and road width, and we're having a strong suggestion that the city council evaluate directing staff to have no parking on that street. Okay, that's addition to code, because as far as we're concerned, the code is met, but there was still the opportunity for the public to come and give us a concern, and we reacted to that concern in an appropriate way. If we eliminated, and I suppose they could still come for public input, and address some of those things, but this has, been an ongoing thing
So
where I
that-
think the process worked.
In that situation, it's not so much that the process worked. That is a situation where, yeah, there was some public concern, and we provided them with an opportunity at this particular meeting where they could give their input. However, remember that comment was made several meetings ago, and at that time, Mark Christensen and Kevin said that, yeah, there are, because I was the one who asked that question. What recourse does such a person have in order to get no parking posted on the streets? And both Mark and Kevin said that there are processes within the city in order for an applicant to do that, or for a resident to do that. We just happen to have an additional venue for them to voice their opinion, but that's not the way the process actually is designed.
Did we not open up public comment, reopen public comment for Lexington Green last week? And that concern came up?
No, these concerns come
No,
up.
I
That's
asked-
not the point.
I asked him, I asked Mr. Evans about the widest piece of equipment he had, because at the time that all the people were here, nobody knew what the widest equipment was. And so I asked the chairman if it would be appropriate for me to ask him to come up and answer.
And he commented during the public comment portion today, not the public hearing, but.
All right, I want
It's-
to take the
real-
other side of the
Yeah,
argument.
there's really a philosophical difference, and it's a difference in what you think from a policy standpoint. So, it sounds like you are of different minds, which is absolutely fine. I think that, the city council will have to grapple with it as well. So, if you can come to a recommendation
Sure.
that enough people can vote for, then you can pass it on as is, or with modifications, or just recommend that they deny these proposals.
So, I'm not done with the argument. I came here for an argument. So let me take the other side of the argument, okay? I'm a developer. The difference that I'm seeing is either a 24-hour notice or a 2 weeks notice, right? Maybe it costs me a little bit more money to notice the individuals that are within a certain radius. Let me finish this. But the planning commission meetings are already 2 times a month, which is basically 2 weeks. So what do I buy by getting a 24-hour notice versus the 2-week if still the meetings are 2 weeks apart?
Well, it's a lead time thing. There are a couple things. One is, we have to have our staff reports drafted technically about a week before the meeting, the packet goes out. If there's a notice, it's a whole week before that the decision is made whether or not to put it on an agenda, if you have to do a public notice for it. So it kind of adds in reality about a week. But the other thing it does is it requires property owners within 300 feet to be noticed. And that means that there are apt to be more people that come out and object to it. And there are a lot of people in the development community are comfortable with not having that notice to property owners within 300 feet. And I think where the state and maybe the city council is coming out is that, yeah, you notify these people, but you're creating an expectation that they can change things when they really can't. So I'm not saying I agree or disagree with it. I'm just saying that plays into the.
So now I'm not a developer. I'm a landowner. If I don't get notice and I'm in Hawaii and you guys do something and I didn't get the chance to take a look at it, I'm not happy. And then now I'm a planning commissioner.
Or you have a meeting.
Now I'm a planning commissioner. We've already continued a few items a couple times because we didn't have enough time to look at it. 24 hours isn't going to be enough for us to even review it. So there's all
Won't make any difference
from all
with
of
that.
these different places, I disagree.
The reality is we do a week anyway, even if we're not doing a public hearing, but sometimes you'll have something come up last minute, and
That happens.
it's
with-
like, for instance, a developer needs to change a setback slightly because if they've realized that it's not going to work, or maybe the city's requested an extra wide, or maybe the intersection there, the city's made a request last minute to accommodate the city's needs, and the developer's like, yeah, I'll do it, but we need to get a reduced setback. In those cases, the 24-hour notice might be important, rather than waiting a full 2 weeks or even 1 week. So it helps. It gives us an option to put things on the agenda quicker, where we realize there's not going to be an issue with the planning commission. It helps. It will speed it up. Maybe might not see it like as much as we're saying. It's not going to be the difference between 1 day and 3 weeks, 2 weeks, but there are cases where it could be that much of a difference.
To your point, though, if I was a landowner and the land adjacent to me or something was going to go through this process, if it's a change, then I will be able to it would be legislative. It'd be some kind of a major change, or if it's a minor change, then it's something that the planning director is going to do, and no one would even hear about it unless notice is given afterwards, after the fact. But if it's administrative, then it doesn't matter because it's something that's already part of the. I mean, having lived in the development, the Saratoga Springs development for this long, I knew before I purchased my lot where high density was going to go and all those things because it was already published. And so a few years ago, when high density finally did start to come in, the developers started to come in and make the applications, and everybody was upset about it. It's like, that's your own fault. You know? And so to be given notice that we're going to discuss this, which can't be changed because it's administrative, there's nothing I can do. If it's legislative, we provide an input, an avenue for input. So I think it's worse for us in that we have to say, great, we gave you a chance to speak, but we're going to ignore you anyway. Have to. It's law. That makes it worse for us. I mean, we do represent the residents to a certain extent, and we give them the opportunity during legislative action. But that's not what our purpose is. I mean, all our training has always been about we make sure that the applicants abide by our ordinances, our land use ordinances. That's how we represent the residents. So I think this is a good streamlining, my opinion again.
I mean, there are lots of communities that do a lot more things administratively, without any, without the public meetings and things like that. And the planning commission is used more heavily for the legislative actions and the policy issues, and making recommendation to the city council. Some planning commissions almost exclusively do that, and they let, the staff do administrative things as much as possible. On the other hand, there are communities who like to have lots of public input and every opportunity. So, it's okay to disagree because they're sort of two different trains of thought, and neither one's right or wrong necessarily, but there's some changes that are being proposed and they're before you, and
A specific question.
yeah.
On concept plan with a rezone, the recommendation is that there is no longer a public hearing. Can you speak to just that specific item, since a rezone is a legislative recommendation?
The rezone itself would have to have a public hearing. It's just the concept plan that goes along with it. So because right now, when a rezone application comes in, they have to have a concept plan. And that would stay the same, and the rezone is a legislative action. So that has to go to the planning commission and to the city council, and there has to be a public hearing.
Just on that rezone, not on the concept plan? Or on both, because it's combined?
It's combined, so in effect, it's on both. But what this does is it gives the applicant an opportunity to come in a less formal setting to the planning director, the planning commission, and the city council before they actually file a rezone application, just to sort of test the waters. And that's kind of good government, rather than having somebody have to invest all this money into a rezone application, not having a clue whether, there's no way, or, whether there might be some chance, because it's a legislative action. It just gives an opportunity to try to test the waters first before they invest a bunch of money.
So the gas station down by Pelican Bay, for example, came in, right? They had everybody tell us, we don't want it, we hate it. They provided evidence, they have a child that has special needs, et cetera, et cetera. This would eliminate that. And then it would just come to the planning commission for our recommendation.
But that was a request for a rezone.
That was a rezone,
That was a
wasn't
rezone.
Right, so this is concept plan with a rezone.
But the rezone, you have to have a public hearing with the rezone.
Okay, so not this part, just the next.
Yeah,
Just
all we're saying is you don't have to have the public hearing on the concept plan. The concept plan still has to accompany the rezone.
So it's all,
There's still going to be a public hearing. We just don't have to have it for the concept plan, because the concept plan, there's no decision to be made. You don't even make a motion on it. You basically
Give informal feedback.
Informal input to the applicant. So
So the
it makes sense to
applicant's
have a
gonna
public
have,
hearing on that.
the applicant's gonna have to do more work before they actually come in for the rezone. They're gonna have to have done drawings and a lot more engineer work. So this maybe wouldn't be as good for the applicant, because they're gonna spend the money before they get the feedback from the public that says, heck no, we don't want your gas station.
We have had times where someone has come in and amended the concept plan, but they weren't going to change the zone, and we were like, what do we do? The code requires a public hearing, so we like, well, technically we have to have a public hearing on a decision that we're not even making. It's only informal feedback. That's why we're getting rid of it. You're still going to have the public hearing with the rezone. You're still going to make comments on the concept plan. It's just not going to be a requirement for a public hearing.
Got a commissioner down there, I think, that wants to speak.
yes, I've been wanting to speak for some time. I need to throw something that way.
I think you should.
I'll have to bring a squishy ball.
Here, you can use
That's
this
okay.
if you
Well, that's too far to reach. Well, I am totally in favor of streamlining this stuff. I think a lot of the times when we have public comment, it's generally with annexations and rezones, and then a lot of times with the community plans or the village plans, and we're still having the public hearings at those times, and I think that's where we need them. And a lot of times when we have the administrative-only decisions, even though we've noticed it, there's nobody that shows up. So I think we should do, I'm totally in favor of this.
Well, and I also remember that Maverick that was going in. It was I think a regional community. No, it was a neighborhood commercial that was being, the request was rezoned to a regional community, and it was right at that turn.
It was Business Park.
What's that?
It was Business Park.
Where they want to put a Maverick there, right at that turn, that curve.
Ring Road?
Oh,
No, before that one.
Pony Express in Redwood.
No,
Pony Express.
the one that goes to the elementary school.
By the
right
high school?
No, the elementary school.
oh, it wasn't a Maverick. It was Grandview Boulevard.
Grandview Boulevard, they wanted to put a gas station in there. And there was a lot of public clamor on that one. And it was not, I shouldn't say public clamor, it was input because it was a rezone. But I think that we would have disallowed the rezone, which we did. We didn't approve the rezone because of the layout of the street, the geography, the closeness to the residents. We would have done that anyway, even without public input, and that's for a rezone. So I think that it's great to have the public input to confirm our instincts, but even if they don't, in a case where it's administrative, or if they don't, we would still have to do the right thing anyway. Right thing based on the code, based on safety, based on traffic, things like that. So I just think that we would have done the right thing in that situation, even if we didn't have the public input, because it would have been a ridiculous thing for us to do, despite what the developer wanted.
We may be, I mean, I think we're getting circular here, but I don't think I'm disagreeing with you at all, Ken. I'm not disagreeing with the actions that this group takes from this side of the podium. What I'm saying is, the perception is that the public is getting less opportunity to provide input into items through notice or through just the opportunity to have public hearings. And so I don't think it has any impact on what we do up here, because we're administrative largely. We ignore public clamor, we let city council deal with the policy stuff, but it's just the idea of reducing the opportunity for the public to give their input on specific items.
And I totally agree with you. However, I don't think that's the primary function of our body, is to provide avenues for more input.
We're part of the form of government.
No, it's not our, we provide avenues of input where appropriate. We've been doing it for areas where we don't have to, but we did. But with state law and with other cities not doing it, it's not something that we have to do, it's something we did great, but it's not really what our purpose is.
Certainly your purpose in legislative actions is to hear from the public, absolutely.
Yes, I agree. That's why I agree with you. I agree with you that we're reducing.
Well, don't you think that if the public is really upset over not getting to have public comment or public input on all of this, that they will go to the council and complain loudly, and what we change for now could get changed back?
Well, those group of residents, they created an initiative, a ballot initiative, and they actually got their demands,
I mean,
legislated.
it's going to work itself out one way or the other, no matter what we do.
Yeah, here's the thing, when I'm done here, there's a lot of land that's unincorporated part of the city right across the street from me. And you can bet I'm going to be here, and I'm going to bring code, and I'm going to back it up, and I'm going to be an intelligent responder to an administrative decision. You can guarantee that's going to happen, and I don't want that voice taken away. I don't want my ability to to be able to speak taken away. Just because most people don't know it, and most people bring in clamor, I don't want my voice taken away.
By the way, this isn't being driven by the council. This is a request by staff to make it really simplify this process based on the feedback from developers. You're welcome to make whatever decision you want. We would highly recommend the rest of the changes if you don't want to remove the public hearing requirement for site plan, preliminary plats, and conditional use permits. We totally get it. We understand. Oh, and I already said site plans. Totally get it. You could also say, hey, let's try this out for a year and see what happens, and if we're not comfortable with it and we get a lot of complaints from the residents, we can revisit this in another year. You have a lot of different options here, but the rest of the changes will help and streamline and simplify the process quite a bit, even if you don't of the public hearings.
If we
And I
remove
sus-
the public hearings, the public may not be able to come back and tell us that they don't like it.
And I'm sure the council will have a discussion about it as well, because, there are pros and cons, and I certainly understand both sides of the issue, and I'm sure there will be discussion, so your input is valuable to them.
How much does it cost to put the ad in the paper?
$75.
$75. Well, that's not as bad as I thought it was.
That's pennies.
Developer pays for that?
75 is what we charge developers.
Okay.
Well, I think we've all argued enough. I have. Anybody else have an opinion they'd like to share before I entertain a motion?
I actually think that what Kevin said is good, where we go ahead and approve everything else, because I don't know if anybody else has an issue with anything, with all the other parts of it, but I didn't find any other issues. I'm okay with keeping the hearings if we want to do that, but maybe it's a good idea to try not and see what happens. Otherwise, we won't know the difference. But I'm actually okay with keeping the hearings. I'm just arguing vociferously for the other side.
I like that.
I mean, I would certainly be in favor of,
Parsing.
yeah, as Commissioner Kilgore said, and even bringing it back in 2 weeks with the hearing portion, just to give, I mean, we had a lot of great argument and debate, and just having a couple weeks to chew on it a little bit. I think in 2 weeks, it would be a reasonable time to potentially, no, maybe 4 weeks?
I have one question I wanted to ask.
Years?
I do have one question.
Hold on just a second. Are you done with that? Yeah. Okay, jump on it.
If we, I'm just wondering, we need to be competitive, and I would like to get more businesses here. Is our having all these public hearings on everything, is that preventing us from getting businesses? Are they going to Lehigh? Are they going to Eagle Mountain? Are they going somewhere else because we are holding them up?
Staff?
We do have a reputation of taking a while to do things, and having lots of process. And that's kind of why, part of the reason this came up to begin with is because the mayor and the city manager and assistant city manager made an effort to reach out to the development community because they'd heard that sort of through the grapevine. I don't know developers in any community who wouldn't argue that.
So I can speak, I've talked to two small business owners.
Trying to be responsive.
One small business owner is building currently and said the process was extremely painful, and one left the city entirely.
My other concern is we have a limited window before the state opens up the prison, and I'm afraid that's going to be the sucker of all of our business development here when they move the prison. So I think we have a limited window to get what we can, because when they open that up, it's going to go there.
Well, and remember, Mark Christensen said that if we don't do something about those monument signs, who's the movie theater, that they could jump right over to East Lehigh, and they said it's just that simple for them.
Pet Cats was what it was. Having worked with developers, I will just say that the perceived slowness of getting an application through, it might make a difference whether they go here or go over into Lehigh, if Lehigh has less. Now, that's not to say that every developer will do that, but the word gets out. And everybody else, say most of the surrounding areas are streamlining, and we don't. We keep the public hearings.
I've got an idea. So state law doesn't require a public hearing, as we've clearly established. It also doesn't require a 10 days advance notice. It would allow an opportunity for a public hearing, but not requiring the noticing the adjacent property owners and the newspaper notice. That's an option, so you wouldn't have the 2-week lag, but you would still have the public hearing, if that makes sense.
So the public hearing is not defined by the notice? It's not part of the definition? Oh.
We can, so the reason why we piggyback with the public hearing onto the ordinance and or the zoning map, ordinance, and general plan requirements under state law, but we don't have to do that. If it is for one of these administrative decisions, we could say just your regular 24 hours notice, no newspaper notice, but it's a public hearing. They'll have a chance to look at the agenda and come and speak their minds if they want, but we're not going to send out the postcards to adjacent property owners. We're not going to publish it in the paper, but we are going to allow a public hearing. That's an option as well. Now, you can't do that with the zoning or zoning map amendment or a Title 19 amendment or a general plan amendment, but you can do it for these administrative decisions. So it'd be an administrative, or it'd be a different type of public hearing.
I'm going to say something here that and this is kind of on this subject, but I'd like to see it where if an applicant submits by 10 o'clock on Monday morning, they have an expectation that they will go to development review within so many days, and so they can plan. And I always, anywhere I worked in California, you knew it didn't make sense, but you had to be in by 4 o'clock on Friday afternoon. Now, nobody's going to look at it, but you still had to make that deadline. But then you knew that if you had put in a complete application, everything was done, then you had 2 weeks you'd go to development review, then you'd go to design review, and we had a whole lot more processes, and then you had a pretty good idea where you were going to come out the backside. And I don't think we're giving developers that kind of timeline. And I'd like to see it where you have a...
Well, we do in one respect, and what we say is that when you give us a submittal, we'll try to turn around and give you comments in 2 weeks. And we've been a little off that because we've been so swamped and we're short on staff. I mean, we can only do what we can do. But I have yet to see an application come in that didn't need changes.
And I never submitted one that didn't go sailing through.
And that's great. I mean, really. But often what happens is, you know, if we establish that expectation, and then the application needs lots of comments, they have to respond to those, and that takes time. And then they'll, you know, they inevitably blame us anyway, even though it's a response time. Often the delay is a response time from them responding to the comments. So, I mean, I totally see what you're saying, and there are many communities who do that. And I've worked under those conditions as well. But this community likes to look at things pretty carefully. And since they do, it usually takes longer than just one review to get to the planning commission level.
Well, I think we're encouraging bad behavior.
Maybe. I don't know.
So we do need to make a decision shortly, but I would like to make a suggestion back to city staff. I would like to see an analysis that identifies other bottlenecks besides public hearings that slow down the process of an applicant. If we could see other things that do that, maybe we can focus our attention on other items that can make us more business friendly.
And we have actually, that's been part of this whole analysis.
Okay.
That's been going on. This is just one piece of it, really.
Okay.
If you look at the table, it streamlines the process quite a bit, besides the public hearing issue. Like I said, if you like the idea of you know, having a different type of public hearing for administrative matters, that would help things a lot too, because then we don't have to do the newspaper notice and notice to people within 300 feet. Just an idea. That would help things, that would speed things up quite a bit.
I think residents that are concerned about what's going on, whether they get a notice or not, they're going to know, and they're going to come. So I think that Kevin's got a great idea.
Do we need to discuss that more before we entertain a motion?
So do we know what want to do? I don't think we need to discuss it. Do we know what the motion's going to sound like?
Don't.
So
It could go any way. It could go a lot of different ways right now.
You could also send on the rest of the code amendments and then have it come back for the public hearing portion, and then staff would draft the alternate public hearing language in the code for you to consider.
Say that.
I personally would like to see what other cities are doing. I'm sorry, I was distracted. I was trying to find what Lehigh and some other surrounding cities were doing in
That's
relation
fair.
to this.
Meg Ryan said that they're all doing that as well, that they're.
Well, I understand that Meg Ryan said something, but I would like to verify that if possible.
Let's compare code.
Especially in light of, if we have a reputation of being slow, I'm doubting that's just because of the public hearings. That just doesn't even pass the sniff test. It could be a component. It's not the reason.
I think that's not what the point of this was. The point, making the code more efficient is one aspect of it, but that's not the point. The point is that we are doing administrative actions that the public really has no ability to.
I fully understand that. I just know that some of the argument was being business friendly and having developers come here instead of somewhere else.
Well, that's all benefit. That's all plus, but it doesn't mean that that's the argument.
Well, I'm wondering, when we talk about perception, is it worse to not have the public hearing and the public not be involved, or have the public, have 100 people out here, and we tell them we are unable to listen or consider your testimony because by law we have to do this, then they get really upset over that. And so, I mean.
We can always direct them to city council. I mean, they're
That's just kicking the ball down.
but they're the elected, they're the people they should be.
But they don't have a job.
We have a job. We don't need to
They
kick it
don't
down
have
to
public hearings at council.
So that goes back to the original, is where does the public have a chance to voice their opinion in a public hearing? If it's not here, city council doesn't have public hearings on anything but annexations, right?
Annexation and rezones.
And rezones. That's the only thing that,
And,
I mean, you look down on the city council section, and it's just blank the whole way down. And this is the only place where the public has to come to voice their opinion, even though it's an administrative body 80% of the time.
Right. You're right. So
Let me ask everyone, does everyone feel like they've had a chance to be heard tonight? I know I have. Everybody else? Okay. I'll entertain a motion. Let's use the process and move this forward or whatever.
no, I'd make the motion if I could pull it up. Just a minute.
Okay, so, based upon the evidence and explanations received today, I move to forward a positive recommendation to the City Council for the proposed amendments to Chapter 19.13.04, Development Process and Requirements, with the findings and conditions in the staff report dated April 19th, 2018, with the exception, well, this is where, no, that's my motion.
I second.
We have a motion from Ken Kilgore. We have a second from Sandra Steele. Is there a question on the motion? I have a question. You had said that you appreciated his proposal to amend. Ken had a suggestion about doing something different with the notices.
Yeah, and I was trying to think, how do I do that? To take out, like, I guess someone said we were parse out the hearing part of it. And I just wasn't sure how I could do that without actually making lots of ripples throughout the code. I mean, if it was just that table, that would have been easy. But it's not. It's the table only consolidates things that were, summarizes all the things that are in the code, and that's why I ended up not. So I just make that motion.
Okay, any other questions on the motion?
Vote.
All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? No. Nay. So we have 2 nays and the rest were So we're forwarding a positive recommendation to the city council.
If they have a problem with some of that, they'll come.
Yeah, if you ever wanted an argument, that was a good one. Okay. Item number 9, approval of minutes. I'll entertain a motion.
I actually have one correction I'd like to make on
Sure.
the minutes. On line 195, the word moment, I think should be monument.
Do you have that, Nicolette? Any others besides that one?
That's it for me.
Any other changes for anybody else? Okay.
195. Found it? Okay.
Got it? Okay. I'll entertain a motion.
I move to approve the minutes of April 12th, 2018 with Ken's correction.
We have a motion. Do I have a second?
Second.
We have a second. Any question on the motion? All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed?
Chair, I'm going to abstain.
Thank you. Reports of action.
We don't have any reports of action. The next, anything that you voted on, there will be ample time to get a draft of the minutes done
Commission
Before they go
comments. Oh, sorry. I just didn't
before they
mean
go to
interrupt.
city council.
I was getting excited. Commission comments.
It's everything I hoped for.
Sorry?
This was everything I hoped for.
We don't know you well enough to know if that's sarcasm or
A
not.
little bit of
We'll
sarcasm.
take it as it is. Director's report?
Oh, boy. I really can't think of too much on the mixed residential zone or mixed living zone or whatever we're going to end up calling it. We did have a productive session with the city council. We talked about each of your conditions that you placed on that, and then they added a few. And we are going to talk about it again at their next meeting. And again, we will be forwarding a positive recommendation. Most of their changes had to do with the commercial piece and the density, that they wanted 8 units to the acre, and they could get up to 12, but they could get up to 10 if the applicant provides additional open space or something else. Commercial. And then they could also get 2 for if it's adjacent to transit, and that they address that with their plan. So they could get to a total of 12, but the expectation going in is 8.
There was a contingency on the transportation corridor?
Yes, well, contingency, yeah. Yeah, if it's on a transportation corridor, they can get 2 more units per acre.
And that's determined by UDOT?
Mm-hmm.
Interesting. Okay, thank you.
I believe it's UDOT in the MAG plan.
Yeah, in the MAG plan. And definitely, they talked about commercial at some length, and what they decided was that in general it would be optional, but if they are rationalizing their density using the transit corridor, then they have to provide some opportunity for commercial, and that could include the sort of flex space that was talked about where you have a residential unit and there's a room that could be used either as small commercial or as a residential use, with the townhome or whatever. And that could be one way to fulfill that requirement, or they could propose other neighborhood commercial uses.
All right. Without objection, we adjourn.
Nora, I'm going to ask you off